They mocked him for feeding an alien prisoner. 10 minutes later, she saved all of humanity. The rain never stopped on Draxon 4. It wasn't real rain, not like the soldier Kalen Rourke remembered from his boyhood on Earth. This was acid mist, thin and bitter, drifting down in endless curtains from a green-black sky. The drops ate pits into metal if you didn't scrub them fast enough. They chewed the skin raw if you stayed out too long. But even in that burning drizzle, the human war camp held. Fences crackled with current, gun turrets rotated with their dead-eyed precision, and floodlights painted the night in pale cones. Inside the perimeter, soldiers moved like restless shadows. They weren't here to win a war. They were here to hold a war. Kalen had been stationed on Draxon 4 for 14 months. 14 months of mud, mist, and blood. 14 months of watching alien prisoners march through the gates in chains. Captives pulled from battlefields where neither side could remember what they were fighting for anymore. The official name for the enemy was the Shirathi Collective, though the soldiers had other names: spikes, scales, bugs. None flattering, none humanizing. Kalen had stopped using names a long time ago. It was easier not to. But that night, something shifted. He had just finished patrol when the commotion started near the pens. Voices carried through the mist, laughter, mocking, cruel. Kalen pushed his way through the cluster of soldiers gathered at the wire. Beyond the fence, a new batch of prisoners had arrived. Most of them slumped in the mud, skeletal frames wrapped in torn uniforms, shackles biting their wrists. The guards barked orders, prodding them with shock batons until they collapsed in huddled rows. And at the far end, half buried in the sludge, was her. She wasn't bigger than a teenager, though her features marked her as fully grown by alien standards. Her skin shimmered faintly in the floodlights, a pale lavender bruised by dirt. Her hair, or what passed for hair, fell in tangled streaks of silver down her shoulders. She was thin, too thin, bones pressing sharp under skin. And she wasn't moving. "Worthless," one of the guards spat. "Half dead already. Not even worth the rations," another laughed. The crowd joined in, their voices bitter, hungry for mockery. Some tossed stones, others jeered. Kalen felt his jaw tighten. He should have walked away. This wasn't his fight. He was just a corporal, just another man stuck in a war without end. But then the girl lifted her head, and her eyes, pale, silver, otherworldly, locked on his. Not pleading, not desperate, just steady. Like she saw him. Something twisted in Kalen's chest. Against every instinct, he pushed through the cluster of soldiers, unclipped a ration pack from his belt, and crouched by the fence. The laughter grew louder. "Well, look at that," one of them jeered. "Corporal Rourke's got himself a pet. You feeding it? What, hoping it'll wag its tail? Careful, Rourke, you'll catch a disease." Kalen ignored them. He tore the ration bar in half, shoved one piece into his own mouth to prove it wasn't poisoned, then slid the other half under the wire toward her. For a moment, she didn't move. Then with a trembling hand, she reached forward. Her fingers brushed his for the briefest instant as she took the food. Cold, fragile. But there was strength there too, buried under the hunger. She didn't thank him. She didn't speak. She just held his gaze for one heartbeat longer. And ate. The soldier's laughter followed him back to the barracks. "Rourke, the alien lover. Better keep her chained or she'll bite. Man's lost his mind." Kalen said nothing. He climbed onto his bunk, pulled the blanket over his head, and tried to ignore the weight in his chest. But he couldn't shake her eyes. The next morning, Kalen was back on perimeter duty when the alarm shrieked. Shirathi raiders had hit the East Ridge in the night. The survivors were dragged in at dawn, more prisoners for the pens. Kalen's squad marched them past the barracks, their shackles rattling. The alien girl was still there at the far end of the pen, still silent, still alive. Kalen watched her as the new captives stumbled inside. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just another prisoner. But when he caught her eyes again, steady through the haze of acid rain, He knew he was lying. Two days later, the first strange thing happened. Kalen had been assigned to tower duty, scanning the fog-choked ridges beyond the fence. The mist was too thick to see more than 50 meters. Sensors barely worked in this atmosphere. But then movement. A flicker in the haze. Kalen squinted. He couldn't make out shapes, but his gut tightened. Something was out there. He raised the alarm. Within minutes, the ridges erupted, Sarathi warbands storming through the fog, weapons blazing. The camp braced, guns roaring, fences crackling. The battle was short and bloody, but the humans held. Afterward, the lieutenant clapped Kalen on the shoulder. "Good eyes, Rourke. If you hadn't spotted them, we'd have lost half the camp." But Kalen wasn't so sure it had been his eyes. Because when he glanced toward the pens, he saw her, the alien girl, staring at him again. And this time she had stood. That night he brought her food again. Not rations this time, those were watched too closely. Instead, a piece of bread he'd bartered from the cooks. He slid it under the fence, half expecting her to ignore it. But she took it. Her hand brushed his again. And then for the first time she moved her lips. No sound, just a shape. One word. "You." Kalen froze. "Me?" Her eyes didn't waver. He felt the laughter of the other soldiers echoing in his head, felt the danger of being seen. But none of it mattered. Because in that silent word, in that steady gaze, Kalen felt something impossible. Recognition. 3 nights later, another raid struck. This one was bigger, louder, bloodier. The Sarathi came with heavier weapons, pounding the fences until sparks rained. Kalen fought until his rifle overheated, until his shoulder ached from recoil, until his ears rang with the screams of dying men. But even through the chaos, he saw her. The alien girl pressed against the fence, eyes locked on him through the storm of fire. And when the Sarathi flanked from the west, when they should have caught the camp off guard, Kalen swore he saw her lift her hand, pointing. Warning. He shouted the alarm. The gunners swung west just in time to cut the enemy down. When it was over, the lieutenant praised him again, called him lucky, called him sharp. But Kalen knew better. It wasn't luck. It was her. That night he couldn't sleep. He found himself back at the pens, crouched in the mud, staring at her through the wire. "You knew," he whispered. She didn't answer. "You warned me." Her hand lifted, slow, steady. She pressed it against the fence. Kalen hesitated. Then he pressed his palm to the wire on the other side. Their hands didn't touch. The current buzzed between them, a barrier of fire. But still, for that moment, they were connected. And Kalen realized something that made his stomach twist. This wasn't just a prisoner. This wasn't just an enemy. This was someone who had chosen him. And nothing in the war manuals had prepared him for that. The laughter grew sharper the next day. Word had spread. Rourke's pet warned him again. "Careful, he'll start kissing it through the fence. Don't turn your back, he might be half spike already." Kalen ignored them, but each jeer burned hotter than the acid rain. And when he looked at her again that night when she met his eyes through the wire, he wondered how long he could keep this secret. Because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was listening. To him. And somehow she was making sure he lived. The days after the second raid passed in a haze of mud, mist, and whispers. Kalen tried to focus on his duties, patrol rotations, repairing fences, counting rations. But every time he walked the perimeter, his eyes slid toward the pens, toward her. The alien girl no one bothered to name. The girl who should have been too weak to stand, yet who somehow always knew more than she should. The girl who now haunted his thoughts even when he slept. It began small. The first morning after the raid, Kalen noticed the fence near her section of the pen had shorted. The current fizzled weakly, wires corroded by acid rain. Normally, the prisoners would have rushed it, testing for escape. But they hadn't, because she stood there, silent, watching. And somehow the others stayed back, glancing at her as if she had spoken, as if she had commanded. Kaylin made a note for the engineers to repair it, but the image lingered, her eyes holding the others still, her silence carrying more weight than words. 2 nights later, Kaylin was on watch when a storm rolled in, not the thin mist that ate at the fences daily, but a true thunderstorm, rare on Draxon 4. Lightning flashed across the poisoned sky, thunder cracking like artillery. The camp scrambled to secure equipment, cover supplies, brace the turrets. Kaylin was halfway across the yard when he stopped. He was standing in the pen, bare feet sunk in the mud, face turned to the clouds, and her lips moved. No sound, no cry, just motion, a rhythm. Kaylin froze. For a moment he thought she was praying. Then the sky split. Lightning struck just beyond the east fence, blinding white. But none hit the camp. Bolt after bolt lanced down into the ridges instead, tearing the ground where Sarathi raiders had been massing. Kaylin saw them scatter in the flashes, dark shapes shrieking as the storm tore through their ranks. The soldiers cheered, called it luck. Kaylin looked at her, and for the first time he wasn't sure it was. By the end of the week, the other soldiers noticed his glances. They joked louder now, crueler. Rourke's pet's got him bewitched. Careful, he'll start speaking bug before long. Betty sleeps by the fence. Kaylin kept his jaw clenched and his fist tight. He didn't rise to it. Not yet. But the whispers grew sharper, and when one of the guards accidentally tossed a spoiled ration into her section of the pen, laughter echoing as it splattered in the mud. Kaylin felt something snap. He walked straight over, yanked the guard by his collar, and slammed him against the fence. The current sparked, close enough to singe. Try that again, Kaylin growled, and I'll feed you to the spikes. The guard spat a curse, but his eyes showed fear. When Kaylin let him go, silence fell over the yard. And when Kaylin glanced back, she was watching him. Not surprised, not fearful, just steady, as if she'd known he would. That night, Kaylin couldn't stay away. He slipped to the pens after lights out, crouched in the mud near her section. The rain hissed around them, cold and bitter. He was awake, waiting. I don't know what you are, he whispered, but I know you're not worthless. She tilted her head. He hesitated, then tapped his chest. Kaylin. For a moment, she was still. Then she pressed a hand to the mud, drew a symbol with one finger. Curved letters. Not human, but close enough he could guess. Thira. Kaylin repeated it softly. Thira. Her eyes flickered a shimmer, almost like a smile. And Kaylin felt something stir in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The bond deepened in fragments. One night he slipped her a canteen of clean water. She pressed her hand over his for a heartbeat before taking it. Another time he found her tending a younger prisoner, binding a cut with scraps of cloth. She glanced at him over her shoulder, eyes sharp as if daring him to stop her. He didn't. And once during a quiet patrol, he felt her presence before he saw her. Looked up to find her standing at the fence, watching him through the mist, her hand raised in the faintest greeting. He raised his back. It was nothing, and it was everything. The next raid proved it. It came at dawn, silent and brutal Sarathi saboteurs, crawling through the fog, bypassing the turrets, reaching the fuel depot. The alarms blared too late. Kaylin ran with his squad, heart hammering, knowing they wouldn't make it in time. Then movement at the pens. Sira. She had pressed her face against the fence, lips moving in frantic rhythm. Her hands gripped the wire, eyes blazing silver in the floodlights. Kaylin swore he felt the vibration before he heard the blast. The fuel depot should have gone up in fire. Instead, the saboteurs' charges sputtered, shorted, and died. A shockwave rolled through the ground, knocking them flat. Kalen's squad cut them down before they could recover. When it was over, the lieutenant barked praise again, called it luck, divine fortune, anything but what it was. But Kalen knew. Because when he looked at Syrah, she wasn't surprised. He was exhausted. Her hands trembled on the fence, her eyes dimmed. Like she had done it. After that, Kalen couldn't stay away. Every night he brought something: food, water, scraps of cloth. She took them all, not with greed, but with quiet steadiness. They began to build a language of gestures. A hand pressed to the chest meant you. A finger traced in the dirt meant danger. A palm against the wire meant trust. And in those fragments, something grew. Not just survival, not just duty. Something deeper. But the camp noticed. The whispers turned to suspicion. Rourke's too close to the spike. She's got him under some spell. She's not warning us, she's feeding her kind information. Kalen ignored them until he couldn't. One evening, the lieutenant himself called him aside. "You've been seen near the pens too often," the officer said coldly. "You think I don't notice? You think the men don't talk?" "She's not like the others," Kalen muttered. "She's an enemy. She saved us twice. She's a weapon, Rourke, and weapons are used or destroyed. They're never befriended." Kalen's gut twisted. He saluted stiffly and left. But his mind was already made. That night he went to the pens again. The rain hissed down, cold as always. Syrah stood waiting. "They're going to kill you," Kalen whispered, "or use you until you're broken." Her gaze held his. "I won't let them." He pressed his palm against the wire. For a long moment, she just stared. Then she pressed her hand to the other side, sparks biting the air between them. Kalen's throat ached. "We'll find a way." And though she said nothing, though she couldn't, he felt her answer as surely as if she had shouted it. Together. The next day proved him right. A fever swept the barracks. 3 men went down in a night, raving and sweating. The medic had no supplies left. The last convoy had been destroyed in orbit. Kalen found the lieutenant cursing over the sick. "If this spreads, we're finished." And then a whisper. "Maybe it's her. Maybe she cursed them." Kalen spun on the soldier who said it. "She's not the cause." But suspicion spread faster than fever. Eyes turned toward the pens. Syrah stood there, silent, watching. And for the first time, Kalen saw fear in her eyes. Not for herself. For him. That night, he slipped to the pens again. "They'll come for you," he whispered. "Blame you for this. They'll kill you." Her hands gripped the wire tight. Her lips moved. "No. Yes." His voice cracked. "And if they do, He stopped. Swallowed. Couldn't finish. She lifted her hand, pressed her palm against the fence. He pressed his to the other side. Sparks jumped between them, burning hot. And in that pain, in that fragile contact, Kalen felt it. Not fear, not survival. Something else, something stronger. The fever raged, the whispers grew, and the camp turned restless. Kalen knew it was only a matter of time before suspicion boiled into fire. And when it did, he would have to choose. His duty. Or her. The fever didn't burn itself out. By the 4th day, half the barracks lay shaking and delirious. Supplies dwindled, tempers frayed, and the air was thick with the stink of sweat and acid mist. The medic worked until his hands shook, but he had no antibiotics, no antivirals, nothing. Whispers hissed through the camp like smoke. It's her, the alien witch. She cursed us. Rourke feeds her. He's infected too. Kalen heard it all. He kept his head down, kept his patrol sharp, but every time he passed the pens, he felt the eyes. Not just Syrah's, the men's. Watching, measuring, waiting. It broke on the 5th night. Kalen was woken by shouting, not the panicked alarm of a raid, but a mob's roar. He threw on his jacket and stumbled into the rain. Soldiers surged toward the pens, torches and shock batons in hand. Their faces were fever-flushed, their eyes wild. "She's killing us," one screamed. "End it now," another bellowed. Kalen's gut turned to ice. He forced his way to the front, heart hammering. Syrah stood inside the pen, pressed against the far fence. The prisoners had backed away from her, as if they too feared what the mob believed. Her silver eyes were wide in the floodlight glare, fixed not on them, but on him. "Stand down," Kalen shouted. The lieutenant wasn't there, too sick or too afraid. That left the mob leader, a burly sergeant with sweat gleaming on his forehead. "She's the cause, Rourke," he snarled. "Men dying by the hour, and she sits there smirking. We'll gut her and be done. She saved us more than once. Lies!" The sergeant's eyes burned. "You're bewitched. She's poisoned your mind." He raised his baton. The men surged forward. Kalen moved without thinking. He drew his rifle and leveled it between the mob and the pen. The first man to touch her loses his head. Silence crashed down. Rain hissed. Torches flickered. The sergeant stared. "You'd turn your weapon on your own?" Kalen's hands shook, but he kept his aim steady. "On anyone who harms her." Murmurs rippled through the mob. Doubt, fear, anger. The sergeant snarled. "Then you're no soldier." He lunged. Kalen fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The sergeant dropped, screaming, his arms seared by the bolt. Chaos erupted. The mob surged, some charging, others falling back. Kalen swung his rifle, firing into the mud at their feet, forcing them to scatter. And through it all, Syrah's eyes locked on his, steady, unblinking. He knew it was over. Even if he drove them back tonight, he'd marked himself. He was no longer one of them. He was a traitor. And she was the cause. There was no place left for either of them in this camp. He made his choice. By dawn, the camp had fractured. The lieutenant lay fevered and delirious. The sergeant nursed his wound, and the men glared at Kalen with open hate. Kalen slipped supplies from the storehouse ration packs, water filters, a spare pistol. He packed them into a kit and slung it over his shoulder. Then he went to the pens. The fence buzzed faintly, power sagging from overuse. He cut the current with a stolen key, unlatched the gate, and stepped inside. Syrah rose slowly. The other prisoners shrank back, whispering in their own tongue. Kalen held out his hand. "We have to go." For a moment, she just stared. Then she stepped forward and took his hand in hers. Cold, fragile, but steady. And in that touch, Kalen felt the weight of every choice behind him and every step ahead. They slipped through the wire, into the mist beyond the camp. No alarms, no shouts, not yet. But Kalen knew it wouldn't last. The men would wake, they'd notice, they'd hunt. He tightened his grip on Syrah's hand. "We keep moving." She didn't speak. She never did. But her silver eyes gleamed with fierce light. And somehow Kalen felt stronger. The wilderness of Draxon 4 was no kinder than the camp. The ground was churned to endless mud, poisoned streams cutting through jagged ridges. The mist cloaked everything in shifting shadows, and always the acid drizzle hissed from the sky, burning skin and corroding gear. But Syrah walked as if she knew the path. She paused at forks Kalen would have guessed wrong. She tugged his hand left when he would have gone right. Once she stopped him cold just before a sinkhole swallowed the ground ahead. Kalen stared at the churning pit, heart hammering. She looked back at him. Not smug, not surprised, just steady, like she'd known, again. By the third day, their rations dwindled. Kalen rationed his half to keep her alive, but she always tried to split hers back with him. When he refused, she pressed her share into his hand anyway, eyes fierce. "You need it more," he muttered. She tilted her head, lips moving silently. Together. The word wasn't spoken, but he heard it all the same. On the fourth night, the hunters came. Kalen woke to the sound of boots crunching through the mud, voices low in the mist. Human voices. They went this way. Tracks in the ridge. Don't lose them. Kalen's blood ran cold. He motioned Syrah into a hollow beneath a jagged outcrop. They crouched low, breath held, as beams of light swept the fog. The hunters passed close, too close. One stopped, shining his torch across the hollow. His beam landed on Kalen's face. The soldier grinned. Found! Kalen lunged, tackling him into the mud. The torch sputtered, beam swinging wild. Kalen's knife flashed once, twice. The man went still. Shouts erupted. The others charged. Kalen grabbed Syrah's hand and ran. Shots seared past, cutting the mist with fire. Mud splattered their legs. The ground heaved with each step. A cliff loomed ahead, jagged and sheer. No way forward. The hunters closed in, voices rising. Kalen spun, pistol raised. He fired wild, forcing them back for seconds, maybe less. And then Syrah moved. She stepped forward, past him, eyes blazing silver. Her lips moved. And the ground sang. A vibration rolled through the ridge, deep and resonant. Stones trembled. The cliff shuddered. The hunters froze, eyes wide. Then the cliff face collapsed. Boulders thundered down, burying the soldiers in a roar of dust and stone. The ground shook, then fell still. Silence. Kalen stood, chest heaving, staring at the ruin. Then at her. She swayed, knees buckling. He caught her before she fell. Her skin was cold, her breath shallow. You did that. His voice cracked. You saved us. Her eyes fluttered open. Silver dimmed to gray. She pressed a trembling hand to his chest. You. Then her hand fell limp. He carried her until dawn. Through the mist, through the rain, through the endless mud, his muscles screamed, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Not until he found shelter a hollow beneath an ancient wreck, half buried in the ridge. He laid her down gently, covered her with his jacket, and sat beside her, pistol in hand, watching the mist for more hunters. But even as exhaustion dragged at him, his eyes kept straying to her face. Fragile, alien, beautiful. He remembered the jeers, the laughter, the hatred. And he knew, with bone-deep certainty, that none of them had ever really seen her. But he did. That night, as the acid rain hissed against the wreckage above, Kalen felt her hand brush his in the dark, weak, trembling. But there. He turned his palm, laced his fingers with hers. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. And in that silence, in that fragile contact, Kalen realized the truth. This wasn't just survival. This wasn't just war. This was the beginning of something stronger, something worth every risk. The wreckage became their world. It was the carcass of some ancient ship, long before the human Zerathi War, rusted to a skeleton and half buried in the ridges. Acid rain had carved it hollow, but its frame still offered shelter. For a week, Kalen and Syrah lived there. He scavenged rations from abandoned supply caches and hunted the few scavenger beasts hardy enough to survive in Draxon's poisoned mud. He set traps for clean water, scrubbed his rifle until it gleamed, and kept a watch fire glowing low through the nights. And always she was there beside him, silent, steady, watching him with those silver eyes that seemed to see more than eyes ever could. At first she barely stirred. The collapse of the cliff had drained her, left her weak and trembling. Kalen worried every day she wouldn't wake again. But slowly strength returned. Her steps grew steadier, her eyes brighter. She moved around the wreckage with a grace that made her seem part of it, like she had always belonged here. And through it all, their bond deepened. Not in words, never in words. In touches, in gestures, in the way she pressed his canteen back into his hands before drinking herself. In the way her hand brushed his as they shared the thin blanket. In the way her gaze softened when he whispered her name. Syrah. On the 8th night, she sat across the fire, her face lit in silver glow. Her lips moved carefully, deliberately. Why? Kalen frowned. Why what? She tapped her chest, then his. Why you help me? Kalen stared into the fire. Because. His throat tightened. He had no neat answer. Because no one else would. Because I couldn't watch them treat you like that. She tilted her head, waiting. He swallowed. Because you're not worthless. You never were. And maybe I needed to remember that not everything in this war is hate. For the first time, he saw something flicker across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite sorrow. Something deeper. She reached across the fire, her fingers brushing his. And for the first time, Kalen didn't feel the distance between human and alien. Just two souls, scarred by war, clinging to one fragile connection. The next morning, everything changed. Kalen woke to the sound of engines. Distant at first, then closer. Heavy, thrumming, metallic. Dropships. He scrambled from the wreckage, rifle in hand, heart pounding. Through the mist, silhouettes descended, sleek black craft, marked not with human insignia, but with the jagged sigil of the Sarathi. Sira was already outside, eyes fixed on the sky. Kalen cursed. They found us! He grabbed her arm. We have to move! But she didn't flinch, didn't run. Instead, she lifted her hand toward the ships, lips moving in that silent rhythm. And the air shifted. Kalen felt it, deep in his bones, a vibration. A hum. The dropships wavered in their descent, engines sputtering, stabilizers bucking. One veered into a ridge and exploded in fire. The other staggered, but steadied, disgorging squads of armored Sarathi soldiers into the mud. Kalen's blood turned to ice. They were surrounded. He fired until his rifle screamed, dropping the first wave as they charged through the mist. Energy bolts lit the wreckage, acid rain sizzling where they struck. Sira stood behind him, hands raised, eyes blazing silver. The ground thrummed with her power, knocking soldiers off balance, tearing fissures in the mud. But there were too many. Run! Kalen shouted, grabbing her hand. They sprinted through the wreckage, bolts searing past. A ridge loomed ahead, jagged and steep. Kalen shoved Sira up first, pushing until she clawed over the edge, then hauled himself up behind her. Explosions tore the ground where they'd been a heartbeat before. They stumbled into the mist beyond. Kalen's lungs burned. His legs shook, but he didn't stop. Because Sira's hand was in his, pulling him forward. Hours later, they collapsed in a hollow, too exhausted to move. Kalen pressed his back to the stone, rifle limp in his lap. His chest heaved with every breath. Sira knelt beside him, her hand on his arm. Her touch was cold, trembling. You saved us, he rasped. Her lips moved. We. Kalen's chest ached. He wanted to laugh, to cry. Instead, he pulled her hand to his chest, pressing it over his heart. We, he echoed. For a long moment, they just sat there, leaning into each other, the mist curling around them like a shroud. The next night, the truth came. They had found shelter in the ruins of an old Sarathi outpost, its walls cracked and overgrown with corrosion. As Kalen built a fire from scraps, he found Sira standing before a shattered console, her hand pressed to the cold glass. Her eyes glowed silver in the dim light. Kalen froze. You know this place. She turned, lips moving slowly. Home. Kalen frowned. This was your world? She shook her head, touched her chest. Mine. And then she drew a symbol in the dust, the same one she had written the night she gave him her name. But this time she added another beside it. A sigil unlike any he had seen. He didn't understand. She reached out, touched his temple with trembling fingers. And then he saw. Visions flooded his mind. A world of silver skies and resonant towers. Her people, tall and luminous, singing in harmonies that shaped storms and calm seas. A lineage not of warriors, but of seers. And then fire. Kirathi ships blotting out the stars, towers crumbling, her people slaughtered. Sira screaming in silence, shackled, dragged away, her bloodline nearly gone, but not destroyed. Because she was the last. Kaelin staggered back, breath ragged. You're not just a prisoner. Her silver eyes met his. Key. The word wasn't spoken, but it thundered in his mind. The revelation settled like a stone in Kaelin's gut. She wasn't just a girl. She wasn't just a victim. She was something far greater. A weapon, a prophecy, a hope. And now every faction in this war would hunt her for it. Humans. Zirathi. Everyone. He sank to his knees, running a hand through his hair. Gods, what have I done? Sira crouched before him, her hand finding his. Not accusation, not blame, only trust. Kaelin swallowed hard, forcing down the panic. Then we fight. We keep moving, until we find someone who'll listen. Her gaze softened. She pressed her forehead to his, a gesture so tender it stole his breath. For the first time in years, Kaelin felt something other than despair. Hope. And more than that. Love. It didn't last. The humans found them 3 nights later. Dropships screamed through the clouds, floodlights cutting the mist. Soldiers poured into the ruins, rifles leveled. Kaelin raised his hands, dragging Sira behind him. Don't shoot, he shouted. She's not your enemy. A voice cut through the rain, cold, hard. The lieutenant. Rourke, step aside. Kaelin's stomach dropped. Sir, she's a weapon, the lieutenant barked. Command wants her contained. You've done your part, now stand down. Kaelin's throat clenched. He glanced at Sira. Her eyes blazed silver, fear flickering behind them. Sir, if you take her, you'll destroy her. You'll destroy everything. The lieutenant's face twisted. Enough, arrest him. Soldiers surged forward. Kaelin fired. The ruins exploded into chaos. Bolts seared the stone. Soldiers screamed. Kaelin dragged Sira through the wreckage, firing wild, heart pounding. Go, he shouted, run! But she didn't run. She turned, eyes blazing, hands lifted. The ground roared. Walls collapsed. Soldiers were thrown like dolls. The lieutenant screamed orders, but his voice was drowned in thunder. And through it all, Kaelin and Sira fought side by side. Not man and alien, not soldier and prisoner. Together. By dawn, the ruins burned. Kaelin and Sira staggered into the mist, bloodied and breathless. Behind them, the wreckage smoked. The humans would regroup. The Zirathi would return. The war was closing in from all sides. But for the first time, Kaelin didn't feel lost. Because he wasn't alone. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The sky burned. Kaelin had seen battlefields before, but never like this. Not the scattered raids on Draxon, not the ambushes in the mist. This was war on a scale that cracked the heavens. Zirathi cruisers tore through orbit, fire raining from their cannons. Human battleships returned fire, their engines blazing as they dove into the fray. The air trembled with the shock of orbital bombardments. Every blast a miniature sun. And caught between them, Kaelin and Sira. They crouched in the ruins of a shattered ridge, mud splattering as explosions rocked the ground. The wreckage of a human dropship burned nearby, its crew long dead. The sky itself seemed to scream. Kaelin tightened his grip on his rifle, heart hammering. His armor was scorched, his lungs burned from smoke, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not with Sira beside him, her silver eyes blazing in the chaos. Kaelin. The sound made him freeze. His head snapped toward her. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd imagined it. But no, her lips had moved. The sound had been faint, broken, but real. He had spoken his name. He stared, breath caught. You can... But there was no time. A squad of Zirathi surged through the smoke, weapons raised. Kaelin cursed and fired, dropping 2 before the others dove for cover. Sira stepped forward. Her eyes flared silver bright, her hands raised. The ground trembled. Shards of stone ripped free and hurled into the squad like spears, impaling them where they crouched. The earth fell still. Silence followed. Kaelin stared at her, chest heaving. Gods! Syrah's hands trembled. Her voice, raw and cracked, whispered, "Not gods. You." And then her strength buckled, and she collapsed into his arms. The battle raged for hours, but they couldn't hide forever. Both sides wanted her. Humans saw her as a weapon. Zirathi saw her as a threat. Neither cared what she truly was. And Kaelin knew they wouldn't stop until she was either caged or dead. So he made his choice. Again. "We end this," he whispered, crouched beside her in the hollow of a wrecked tower. His voice was hoarse but steady. "No more running, no more hiding. We end it here." Her silver gaze met his. "Together," she whispered. It was the first word she'd ever truly spoken aloud. Kaelin's throat ached. He nodded once. Together. The final battle came at dawn. The Ridge Valley became the crucible. Human armor divisions clashed with Zirathi infantry, metal screaming against alien flesh. Gunfire and energy bolts lit the mist like lightning. And at the center, Kaelin and Syrah stood. Soldiers from both sides surged toward them, driven by orders to seize or kill. Kaelin fired until his rifle overheated, then drew his knife, cutting down anyone who reached too close. Blood smeared his armor, mud clogged his boots, but he refused to fall. And beside him, Syrah unleashed her full power. The earth trembled beneath her feet, fissures tearing through the battlefield. Storms erupted in the poisoned sky, lightning striking down squads of soldiers. The air itself vibrated with a resonance that rattled bones and shattered metal. For the first time, her voice rose in a song Kaelin couldn't hear with his ears, but felt in his chest, his heart, his very soul. It was fury, it was grief, it was love, and it changed the battle. Human soldiers stumbled, weapons faltering. Zirathi roared in terror, ranks scattering. For the first time, both sides looked not at each other, but at her. At the last of her bloodline. At the one neither side could control. But power had its price. Kaelin saw her falter, knees buckling, silver light dimming. Each strike, each storm drained her further. Her breath came ragged, her body trembling. He caught her as she nearly collapsed, holding her close. "Syrah, stop! You'll kill yourself!" Her lips brushed his ear, her voice a broken whisper. "If I stop, you die! All die!" Kaelin's heart clenched. He shook his head, desperate. "Then let me fight! You don't have to do this alone!" Her silver eyes met his, blazing even through exhaustion. "Not alone." And she pressed her forehead to his, their hands entwined. Kaelin felt it, then her power surging through him. The resonance that had always been hers now flooding into him, amplified by their bond. For a moment, the world fell away. He heard it, not with ears, but with his soul, the heartbeat of the earth, the scream of the storm, the whisper of life itself. And he knew what to do. Together they rose. Kaelin lifted his rifle in one hand, his other clasped in hers. Silver light flared around them, wrapping their bodies in shimmering resonance. The battlefield stilled. Every soldier, human and Zirathi alike, froze as the storm's song rose higher. Kaelin roared, charging forward, bullets tearing through enemy ranks with impossible precision. Every shot struck true, guided by the rhythm in his chest. Beside him, Syrah's voice rose, silver light pouring from her, shaking the ground itself. Bolts of lightning split the sky, firestorms ripped through armor columns, and fissures swallowed Zirathi beasts whole. Together they were unstoppable. Together they were something greater than soldier or seer. Together they were hope. By dusk, the battle was over. The valley lay silent, littered with the wreckage of men and machines. Smoke curled into the poisoned sky, ash drifting on the wind. But the war had not ended in victory for either side. It had ended in silence. Because no one dared raise a weapon again after what they had seen. The seer and the soldier, the alien and the human, not enemies, not masters and slaves, but partners. Kalen knelt in the mud, cradling Sira in his arms. Her silver light had faded to a faint glow. Her body was fragile, trembling with exhaustion. He pressed his forehead to hers, tears burning his eyes. "Stay with me. Please, Sira. Don't leave me now." For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then her lips moved, and for the first time, her voice was clear, steady, and full of life. "You gave me food when I was nothing," she whispered. "Now, you are everything." Kalen's breath broke. He kissed her, gentle and desperate, tasting ash and rain and something far sweeter. When they pulled apart, her silver eyes shimmered with something beyond power, with love. The survivors watched from a distance, human and Zarathi both. Weapons hung limp in their hands. No one dared move against them, because they had seen the truth, that humanity's strength was not its ships, not its guns, not its cruelty. It was compassion, a soldier who fed a starving prisoner, a bond forged in silence and trust, a love that had changed the fate of a war. And in that truth, the seeds of peace took root. Weeks later, the war slowed. Ceasefires were signed, tentative talks began. Both sides knew they could not risk awakening what had slept beneath Sira's bloodline. Kalen didn't care for the politics. He only cared that for the first time in years, the galaxy might breathe again. And he only cared that Sira was beside him. Alive, whole, his. They walked together beneath skies still scarred by war, hand in hand, silent but unbroken. And when she spoke his name again, soft and steady, Kalen knew the truth in his bones. This was not the end. It was their beginning, the end.